This is kind of a weird place for filming, but I wanted you to be able to see the dolls, so this is where we're sitting for now, and I'm sorry if the angle's a little bit weird. So as you're watching this right now, we are in the middle of having a winter storm. I am filming this a couple of days before the storm gets here. I've been busy all week preparing for this bad winter weather. Unfortunately, that means that a lot of my plans for doll projects that I wanted to do this week didn't work out. And that was kind of a disappointment, but you know, I figure we'll just kind of make lemonade, and I thought it would be an interesting time to talk about some of my hobby disappointments I've had through the years. This is actually something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, not because I wanted to complain or anything, but because I feel like a lot of times we see things going like really perfectly for people in the hobby because they don't speak up about issues that they've had or experiences that went wrong, so we can end up feeling really alone. So I'm gonna share some of my worst hobby experiences that I've had, you know, my biggest hobby disappointments. And if you can relate to any of these, then by all means please chime in. But I'm actually digging like really far back into all of my picture folders to get some images of some of these because they happened so long ago. But I'm gonna give you a little spoiler. The doll that has given me the most disappointments through my entire hobby is Rune, and I think that's really funny because if you've been here any time at all, you also know that he is my absolute favorite. I love him so much, and he is still my biggest hobby disappointment overall, with the most disappointing experiences. Rune was my first doll, and as a result he was also my first two disappointments. The very first disappointment that he gave me was his arrival. Over the years I've had a lot of people tell me that this was like a really common experience. A lot of people shared this, but when I was going through it I thought, oh, I'd made a horrible mistake and maybe this hobby wasn't right for me and what was I doing here, you know, and that's not really a good feeling when a doll this size is ridiculously expensive. When I got Rune, I actually picked him based on the April House EID body. I wanted the superhero body because I liked that it didn't have like the shrink wrapped dehydrated look that a lot of more muscular BJDs have and still have. I felt like his musculature was a lot more believable. And I liked that he had the bulk and the well-defined muscles, but he also looked like he had had a drink of water in the last 3 days. I knew I wasn't going to be happy with the head sculpt because at the time there were only 3 EID sculpts. So I chose the one that I thought was going to be the closest after some modification. Ultimately that didn't really matter because while I still have his original head, which has been heavily modded, I eventually did sculpt him his original face, which I love, and so he looks just like he was supposed to back then, even if the humidity is doing a number on his wig right now. But there were a number of things that I had to settle for with him. Not just the head, but also he wasn't available in any kind of tan resin. At the time, April House only had the special real skin resin, and it was only available at release. You couldn't get that just on a whim. It wasn't part of their basic doll package. You could only get the basic dolls in their normal resin or in white resin. So I got normal, and he was so pale. So the color was a disappointment. He looked very ghostly compared to how I picture the character. He is an islander, so he should be much more golden. And I have since then tanned his body with a dye job, and it's something that I'm going to need to redo because the dye has faded over the years. But back then it kind of made it hard to connect with the doll and connect with the character that I wanted the doll to be. That was the whole reason I got into the hobby in the first place. On top of that, possibly because the line was like really new, so you know, there weren't a whole lot of dolls. It was back when the Noct Arcana circus was still going. When he arrived, he was so poorly strung. He was incredibly loose, and I couldn't get him to hold any poses, and he's already kind of difficult to pose because the April House bodies prioritize aesthetic over functionality. And that means that he's basically just a really beautiful brick. I've done a lot of work on this through the years, adding custom parts to make him more posable, more suited to my taste for mobility. But it meant that at first I had this huge doll that wasn't the right color, wasn't the right face sculpt, and I couldn't do anything with him because he couldn't hold any poses. On top of that, my husband and I lived in a really tiny apartment at that time, so he took up a huge amount of space. and there wasn't really anywhere for me to set up to do sewing or customization or anything like that. I did his very first face up on the balcony of the apartment, and that was hobby disappointment number 2. I spent a really long time researching before I started in this hobby, and one of the things I knew I wanted to do was I wanted to learn how to do doll face ups. So I went out and I purchased some rather expensive paints. I couldn't get MSC, so I got Tester's Dull Coat, which I could pick up at work. And then I went to a specialty hobby shop that is no longer around to get a bottle of Tamiya gloss, because according to everything that I read on Den of Angels, Tamiya gloss was basically one of the only ones that was safe for resin. It might have been safe for resin, but let me tell you what, that gloss ruined my first face up. To this day, I don't know what happened, because I was using artist quality pastels, I was using the Tester's Dull Coat, which was like tested and proven in the hobby, but as soon as I put the Tamiya gloss over the top of his lips, they turned really green. So my first face up attempt was ruined. And over the course of several months, his lips turned more and more green due to some kind of chemical reaction between the gloss and whatever was underneath it. And when I spoke to other people in the hobby about it, they told me that I must have done something wrong. That was like really discouraging and kind of hurtful, because I had worked really hard to make sure that I followed everybody's directions so that I could have a good first face up result. And instead, he looked like this. So yeah, that was not my favorite. But I always try to find a silver lining in anything that I do, and that experience led me to start experimenting on my own with materials, how they interact, what they actually do to resin, and I've been able to provide a lot of information about what can actually be used on dolls, what can be used together, what you shouldn't use together, and other things like that that have been beneficial to others, because I didn't want anybody else to have that negative first face-up experience. A first face-up is frustrating enough without having your materials work against you. My third hobby disappointment was Vaughn's arrival. He's actually tied to his stand right now, so I'm just gonna pick up the whole thing. So Vaughn was my third doll. My first one was Rune, and my second was a Resin Soul Bae that I picked up secondhand. I no longer have her. I kind of regret it. She was a really cute little doll, but she didn't work for my plans at the time, and I didn't have the finances available to justify keeping just a random doll because she was cute. Vaughn's arrival was interesting because he was the first doll that the moment I saw him, it was like, that's perfect. That is him. That is the character that I have been writing for all of these years. I have to have him, and he needs to come home, and I need him to have the blonde hair, and it was just perfect. By that time, Ipplas was doing the Elemental Guardians, and they had become a lot more popular, and this release in particular was very in demand. So as a result, the wait for this doll was a lot longer. I actually only waited for like 2 weeks for Rune to arrive, which was super fast in the hobby, even back then. But it was months and months for him, and then when he did arrive, I opened up his box and was very disappointed immediately. At the time of this doll's release, there had been flooding issues in Korea, and the Ipplas workshop had been flooded. All I can guess is that the box that he was shipped in had gotten wet and hadn't dried completely, because the exterior box was totally fine. But when I opened up that exterior box, the interior box had mold. And if you don't know, I am very allergic to mold. Mold has caused almost all of my health problems, so it made me sick, literally sick, when I opened his box. I only took one picture, and it was just some of the mold in the corner of the box, just the box top, because that was what I thought to snap at the beginning. But after I got the doll out and I lifted out the foam, the bottom of the box was all moldy too, and there was mold in the foam. So I got him out, I threw away his box, and then I just kind of like put him in the closet, and the whole experience was soured for me, because I now had this negative association of this doll that I had waited for months and months after knowing he was going to be perfect, and then opening up the box and having him literally make me sick. And I don't blame Ipplas for this, because, you know, they had a lot going on, and I'm sure they would not have deliberately shipped the doll in a moldy box, but it was just damp enough when they did ship it that it just was a very bad experience. I later had another disappointment with this doll when I decided that I wanted to redo the very first face-up that I gave him. I had been practicing a lot, and I thought I could do a better job. I was having a hard time getting some of the gloss off of his eyes, and I was told that I could wet a cotton ball with rubbing alcohol, set it on the eye sockets, and let it sit for maybe like 5 minutes or so, and it would soften the gloss. And while I will say that it worked, nobody warned me that alcohol can also make resin brittle. Everybody always swears that it's really, really safe to use and that it's hard to mess up your doll using it, but I used it in a way that everybody told me was safe, and as a result, he has an eyelid that is broken, and I wasn't being rough or anything either. All I did was remove the cotton ball after the 5 minutes was up, and then I used a cotton swab to try to like gently rub away the paint that was still there, and it just like cracked and chunks of his eyelid came out. Because it's in such a delicate place right there, it's not something that I have tried to repair. I have just masked it with a face up, but it's a little chunk missing and then a whole lot of cracks on his upper eyelid. So that was, I guess, another experience where I learned I couldn't trust what other people told me about the hobby, and I was going to have to learn everything on my own. Big hobby disappointment number 5 was with Faral, and this was not really her fault. It was just kind of one of those things that happens and is frustrating, and the issue that I had with her was that I had sent her faceplate away to have one of my best friends paint it for me. Unfortunately, there was a time period where MSC was not as reliable of a sealant as it is now, and after a few months, I went to get the doll out of my closet where I kept everything at the time, just because we were living in a small space and I didn't have a lot of areas to put dolls out in the house. I went to get her out, and the sealant on her face up had cracked so badly, and it started like right in the middle of her forehead, and just huge chunks of sealant falling off of her face. I was so upset because I really loved the face-up that my friend had done, which was actually the first face-up she had ever done on a doll. I was so impressed. So I was just heartbroken that that happened, because it's like one of my favorite dolls. My best friend had painted it for me as a gift too. She didn't charge me anything for that face-up that she did. She just wanted a chance to do it. But there was nothing that could be done, and the whole face-up had to be wiped. In the end, I'm okay with it because this is the face-up that I have done for her myself. By the time I did this one, I had already learned a lot about face-ups, so I'm happy with this. It's just really different from, you know, the special one that was a gift from my best friend. Hobby disappointment number 6 is, again, Rune. Like I told you, he has been most full of disappointments, which is actually, like, really funny considering his story arc in the books. And that disappointment was that the first time that I did his modifications to do his reptile parts, some of his parts developed really weird bubbles that chipped off. And I still don't know why that happened. It only happened on some of the parts, not all of them, and I used the same preparation and materials on all of the parts all at the same time. It shouldn't have happened only on some pieces, but it did, and that was kind of a letdown, particularly because it was super hard to remove that resin coating after it was on. But I actually have a video about that. It was something that I tackled when I decided to update his modifications and change his knees to make him more posable. So you can go dig around in his old customization archive if you want to see that. Hobby disappointment number 7 was during Lulu's arrival. And I'm not sure if it's something that'll pick up on camera, but her arm right here, it doesn't want to focus, so it probably isn't going to. Well, maybe. Can you see it right there? I'm not sure. But there's a line on her arm right there that I thought it looked like a stress fracture in the making. So I sent a message to Fairyland about it because, you know, I wasn't used to having really tiny dolls. And at that point I'd already had some issues with dolls not being quite up to the quality that I expected. I sent them detailed pictures of the spot and sent them my concerns, and they replied saying that they weren't sure if it was a crack or not. They called it a potential resin flow, which I'm still not entirely sure what that was supposed to mean, because it's like not along any of the seams and it's not like discoloration where the pigment didn't mix in right, so I'm not really sure what they meant by that. But they offered to send me a replacement arm. It arrived just a few days later because they sent it express. I got it out, unstrung her, went to put it on, and the new part immediately broke. I actually still have it here in her box, but there is a crack right here where I tried to put the arm on and it just immediately cracked. And that's like a really thin spot, so I guess it was really delicate to begin with, but I expected the arm to at least fit the elbow. So to this day, she still wears the original arm that had the crack I was worried about in the first place, because this crack was much worse. My 8th disappointing experience was with Arios. He's over here, let me get him. Unlike Vaughn, he is tied to his stand. With Arios, like with Rune, when he got here, the color of the resin was so different from what I expected. In this case, he was actually like way, way darker than any of their promotional photos showed that he was going to be. So when I first opened his box, I was kind of shocked. And I was like, oh man, this is not going to work for this character at all. He is way too tan. But he was just like such a deep coffee brown that I didn't even know what I was supposed to do for a face up, because none of the colors that I had were going to work well on this shade of resin. And ultimately, I actually really like his face up in the end, but it took a while to get there. Love the color now, but just at the beginning, it was so radically different from what I expected and what I pictured for this character that I didn't really know what to do. Even though I was like shocked and disappointed and didn't know how to approach customizing the doll at the beginning, it made me grow as an artist. I don't know, overall that one was kind of neat, but it was still a disappointment at first. Disappointment number 9 was the arrival of my minifee Chloe. And that disappointment actually had nothing to do with her. It was completely the fact that when I opened up the box, it was not her. This is another thing that I documented on my channel. You can see the box opening here for this doll. And when I opened up the box, it was not my doll at all. This was a gift from a friend, and when she arrived, I opened the box and discovered a minifee Luha instead. Denver Doll Emporium was great about the mix-up. They were so apologetic, so fast to get me a shipping label, to get the doll returned to them so that they could send it to the person it was supposed to go to. But I was not alone in the disappointment, because the person who was expecting the Luha also got my Chloe and was understandably upset when they opened that box and saw my doll instead. We actually crossed paths on Den of Angels because a friend pointed out a message where somebody said they had gotten the wrong doll from DDE, and I was like, I have your doll. Don't worry, she's fine. So it got sorted out, but there is really nothing like the shock of being so hyped for a doll that you have wanted for years and years and years, and then you open up the box and it is not even the right doll. And then I'm gonna wrap it up with disappointment number 10, which involves Tall. And this is a head sculpt that I made myself. I kind of documented some of the process here on my channel, and I was so proud of this project and so excited to be able to branch into being a doll maker. It was going to be the first time that I ever sold any of my work. I was going to open up pre-orders. There were people really excited about it, and then just everything kind of went wrong. The first problem that I had was a lot of doll companies that had previously done just head casting for other people told me that they were no longer going to be casting just doll heads because people complained too much about the resin matches not being perfect, which I understood, but it was still a little frustrating. There was one caster that still did heads alone, and that was Haru Casting, and I was so excited to work with Haru because I've always loved seeing his processes that he shares on Instagram, and his sculpting work is really amazing too. So I sent a message to Haru and I was like, hey, I just finished sculpting this head. I have the master ready to go. I want to have it cast by you. And he was like, okay, send me an email because I don't do business through Instagram DM. And I was like, okay, great. So I sent him an email with detailed photos, a couple of questions, and listed out the sample colors that I wanted to get mailed to me so that I could choose what colors I wanted to offer for the head. And he never replied. So I waited about a month. I told him on Instagram that I was going to be communicating with him through email, so you know he knew to be looking for it. He never replied to that message, and I sent another email being like, hey, I'm just following up because I really want to have my doll cast, and he didn't reply to that either. So I thought, well, maybe my email's not getting through. So I actually tried to contact him 2 more times through email using different email addresses, and I never got a single reply. So that was just like really, well, disappointing. And I don't know that he was trying to snub me intentionally or anything. I know he does high business volume, but it was really disheartening to have friends who were in regular contact with him that were constantly getting updates and getting new sculpts made after I contacted him about having mine done. And I'm like the only person who never got a response, no matter what I did. During that time frame, I was in contact with Rose Capital Resin, which was a US-based caster that had recently started and had already been sending out sample casts to people, and everyone had been really happy with the quality. The caster was really friendly, she really knew what she was doing, she was very communicative, and you know, we had just been chatting, so I felt really good about doing that. We were really excited. She sent me sample resin, I picked out the colors that I wanted, we had everything lined up, and she was going to send me a contract. And then she disappeared too. And I did not have it as bad as some of my friends who had actually sent her dolls that were supposed to be cast, had actually paid for dolls that were supposed to be cast, and they had not gotten anything except a handful of sample casts. I know at the time she was having difficulties with her personal life. I know that her kid had a lot of health problems that they were trying to work through, and she was so stressed out because we had been talking about that during the whole course of, you know, trying to get my doll ready for casting. But I still don't really know what happened because she never came back. I eventually did get an email from an assistant that she had hired to try to close everything out properly. I had a very brief back and forth with that assistant, establishing like where I was in the production phase. And I said, you know, I haven't sent in my doll yet. We had just signed a contract, but I hadn't paid anything. She hadn't sent me the invoice even though I had asked for it. I didn't ship my doll. She doesn't owe me anything. So we just agreed, you know, in writing that we were going to dissolve the contract and move on. After that, I decided that I was just going to go ahead and buy a pressure pot so that I could do my own professional grade casting. And that's how I was able to get this really beautiful head cast that I do have, and also the few that I have left that I'm selling off because I'm going a different direction with my hobby. But overall, it was just kind of a weird and disappointing experience, especially when I don't think there was anything wrong with my sculpting, and I tried to be very polite and flexible and relaxed with everybody I worked with. And even though I recently made the decision that, you know, casting the dolls and all that isn't really for me, I kind of wondered if that had gone a little bit more smoothly, if maybe I would be on a really different hobby trajectory now. But there's no way of knowing, and ultimately it doesn't matter. I have what I wanted out of the project, so it's okay. But that's it for my list, my 10 big hobby disappointments. Some of them worked out fine in the end, some of them I'm still a little bit salty about, but hopefully sharing some of my experiences makes you feel a little less alone in the things that don't work out the way that you originally hoped. If you've had similar experiences or letdowns, you can let me know in the comments and we'll commiserate a bit. Hopefully by the time this goes up, I still have electricity so I can do that commiserating, and if not, then I'll be back probably early next week when the power is back on and I can actually finish some of the doll projects I really hoped to do this week. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.